So tonight we have Vicki Figueroa
Yes.
here to talk to us. She is the Assistant Director of Cultural Ministries with the AOD, the Archdiocese of Detroit. And please, everybody, give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. I don't have a loud voice, so is the microphone coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect then. All right, well, like she said, I'm the Associate Director for Cultural Ministries. And what that means is I work with special populations here in the Archdiocese, including primarily African American. I also help partner with our Hispanic ministry. And then I act as the contact for our coordinator or our contractor who does American Indian for Native American ministry. And our whole goal is to inform the church of the needs of these diverse communities and then have the communities respond and serve us and help us with their gifts. So it's a way to kind of build community, make them feel included in the Catholic Church, make them feel special, and give them a place or a seat at the table. So we don't always want to do things for them, but more or less we want to do things with them. So I'm going to talk tonight, it's a different kind of presentation, but I'm going to talk tonight about our church and a little bit of other churches, but the Catholic Church, and I call it the two roads of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church has done some wonderful and marvelous things to mitigate some of its, some of our racist past, and there's some opportunities that they may have missed a little bit along the way that can easily be made up with just kind of an intentional type of plan and efforts going forward. So the talk is going to begin with me kind of defining and talking about racism, which is an industry unto itself, as you know. And then we're going to move into what the church has done well and some other things that the church has missed on, some things that we can do to mitigate racism in our own neighborhoods, our own schools, our own businesses. And then, of course, I'll open it up for Q&A. If you have a burning question and you just want to stop me during the middle of the presentation, feel free to raise your hand, jump up and down, and I will do my best to try to get with you. But I'm going to try to get through as much of this as I possibly can. Mary, how much time do I have?
2 hours.
Oh, do I? Oh my goodness, okay.
Within those 2 hours, it's up to you.
Okay, all right. Maybe we won't take 2 hours, but maybe we'll take some time at the end to practice a skill, which is called a cup of coffee, and you'll sit down with somebody, kind of share your life story, a little bit about your cultural heritage, because it is in understanding your own cultural heritage and appreciation for your heritage and someone else's that it makes it easier for you to enter into mitigating racism. So let us begin. So what is racism? I like the way Bishop Braxton puts it. Bishop Edward Braxton is one of our Bishop Emerita. He is an African American bishop out of the South, and he wrote one of the books on the table called The Catholic Church and the Racial Divide, where he talks about what the Catholic Church has done wonderful and some things that the Catholic Church can do in the future to improve our racist society. But he just puts it out on the table. Racism is a sin. It divides the human family, violates the human dignity of the person with the same Father, and that Father, of course, is God. The Catechism and Gaudium et Spes also says something too. And Gaudium et Spes, of course, is from Vatican II, but it says, every form of social or cultural discrimination, fundamental personal rights on the grounds of sex, race, color, conditions, language, or religion must be curbed and eradicated as incompatible with God's design. God designed all of us with, the dignity that he gave to us, and we should all be treated that way. So when you have racist attitudes or you harbor racist feelings towards someone, you're basically saying that, no, God, not everyone is equal of the dignity that you have given to me. Those people are not equal to my dignity, and that, of course, is not true. Open wide our hearts. If someone could... Mary, could you do me a favor? Can you hold up Open Wide Our Hearts? It's the thin book right there. That one right there. Yeah, that is one of the latest pastoral letters on racism. It came out in 2018 or 2019. And I'll be quoting from this one a lot. It is the latest Bishop letter on racism, and it's a pretty good entry-level racism letter. And what it does, it kind of opens up the door for us to go further. But it gives a great introduction. If you've not entered into conversations on racism, this is a pretty good place to start. It gives you a vocabulary, it gives you theology, it gives you some Bible scriptures, and it talks about not only racism towards African American, but also talks about Hispanic and Native American issues, as well as some issues of bias that come into racism as well. All right. Daniel P. Horan wrote a book called The White Catholic's Guide to Racism, and he did some interesting play on words with racism because he took it from just a plain definition all the way to this, almost like this industrial complex. But past and current, he said that past racism definitions are, it's the perception, it refers to person A committing an act against person B. And that for a long time has been pretty much our understanding of racism. But he said there's a new realization that we have to think about. Many people, conscious or not, working in tandem to perpetuate a system that advantages some and disadvantages others. So racism is more than just one person acting against another, but it's person acting against another, system acting against system, institution acting against institution, sometimes, country acting against country, groups against group. So there's this whole conglomerate of activity going on that contributes to the racist problem in our nation that we will have to mitigate. So what are the types of racism? Racism is more than just a solo or individual act, but you will find many different definitions, many different levels of this, but these are the four most popular ways the four most popular types of racism that we will talk about. One is interpersonal, and this is actually the most visible form of racism. This is the racism where you have a person calling another person a slur, a person acting ill towards another person. And the thing about interpersonal racism is that it has a public and a personal dimension, and or private dimension. Here's what I mean. So, you're sitting around the dinner table at Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you share some, ethnic jokes, or you're talking about, those people on this side of the track, or this people in this particular zip code, and you think that it's an innocent conversation. What studies have shown is that those private conversations fuel your public persona. So all of a sudden, what you think is just a private, harmless, meaningless conversation, private, harmless, meaningless action really becomes the public thing. And the problem with people that have this public, baggage built up is that these are the people who then go on to develop systems. So you have, all of this racist baggage in you, and then all of a sudden you develop a system that reflects your baggage. And then it goes round and round and round. So, but the great thing is, well, it's not great, but the wonderful thing is that the church can do a lot to mitigate interpersonal racism, because we're the people who say that we are humans, we are flawed, we have reconciliation, we have sacraments, we have love, we are the evangelizers, so we can do the most about interpersonal, and that goodness that we've developed can then feed into the other types of racism and begin to mitigate them one by one. But it starts with us as the individual, because it is the most visible and the most pervasive form of racism. And then you have internalized racism, and this is racism where it's fueled by our opinions and shaped by our culture. So self-doubt. For 300-400 years, African Americans have been, the victims of racism here in America. So between, segregation, highs and lows, between Jim Crow, between being enslaved, between Reconstruction, there's a certain amount of self-doubt and unlove that is built up in our person. And that is part of the racist machine as well, because maybe we don't try as hard. Maybe we, come across as wounded or angry, and it kind of like fuels how people react or interact with us. And then you have the opposite. Maybe you've grown up with privilege. Or another way to say privilege, because that can be a loaded term these days that a lot of people don't like, is to say advantage. And even if you don't specifically know your advantage or privilege, you may have grown up with these advantages in your quote-unquote back pocket. For example, schools are the perfect example. A lot of schools in the inner city are underfunded and under-resourced simply because they're funded by taxes. And taxes in certain neighborhoods, in our urban areas, in our inner city, even in our rural areas, are based on property values. When the property values are low, the resources that that school receives aren't as good. And as a result, you come out with an education that may not have been as rich and resourced as education in wealthier neighborhoods. So even though you didn't specifically harbor racist attitudes towards someone, you subconsciously or passively benefited from a system of having good education. So that's what we mean by privilege advantage. And then there's structural, which is societal. And these are like the compounded impacts of racism due to, history, tradition. Oh, well, they've always lived over there. Beliefs, well, yeah, they're not as smart. Or the interconnections of policies. For example, one I like to use all the time is redlining. It's where certain zip codes in Detroit or any urban city got more funding for housing or more loans for housing and others didn't. The people that got loans for housing got nicer houses. The people that didn't pretty much had to scrape by, and they couldn't get loans, so they had to pay cash for their homes or come up with some sort of caching for their residents, and as a result, maybe they didn't have a home that was as large, or maybe they weren't able to get loans to do, home improvements. It's not in this slide, but it's in a future slide, but one of the toughest housing, I don't want to call it a code, but one of the housing systems that really limits, that could limit activity of African Americans or other minorities is single-family units. Because here's why. You need more money to buy a single family. You don't have any renters, no duplexes, other things that maybe people, single moms, people of diversity can afford. And as a result, you're kind of building like a little bit of a class system there. So that's what we mean by structural and societal racism. And then, of course, systemic and institutional, and these are social, political, and these are really the big giant animals, but things such as education, healthcare disparities, and other policies that don't favor or other policies that put blacks and other minorities, I don't want to say the word minority, we're trying to get out of that, but other groups of people at a disadvantage. And the reason why we don't want to say minorities anymore is because in the church and in other societies, black and brown people are slowly becoming the majority. So we're working on some different vocabulary for that. We don't have it yet. We may slip into saying minority, but we really do want to be careful because they are no longer lesser or fewer in numbers. Our black and brown communities have really grown. Any questions to this point? Is it making sense so far? Okay, good. All right. So I know we can always hide behind definitions, but I wanted to put some of these kind of definitions, what do they look like in real life? What are some examples that we can show that racism exists? So I'm going to use myself as some examples. I used to work in radio sales. I worked in radio sales for about 5 years. I worked at WJR, so I'm sure a lot of you know that particular station. I was there for 5 years, and I wore my hair As a black woman, I wear my hair natural. I don't braid it, I don't put any condition, I don't put any straightener in it, I just wear it as the Lord gave me. Because it's easier for me. I do a little color on it just because I like the red, but that's about it. Well, my first month there, one of the senior sales reps pulled me aside and said, "You really should do something with your hair because our customers don't like that." What? He's like, "Yeah, our customers don't like that. They're going to think you're like radical or something." And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to change my hair." And I kept it, and I did fine, and I ended up in like, not my first year, but my second year, I ended up in the top 30% in the country. So no, I didn't change my hair. And I'm not going to change my hair for anyone just because he thought their WGR customers wouldn't like it, so it's good. All right, and then as a healthcare patient, I'll skip over that one, but here's another one that's easy. It's the $50 and $100 bill. And this shows you how deep sometimes racism gets. We don't even know it. When I go to the bank and I ask for money and I take out a withdrawal, I ask for 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s. I cash in my 50s, I cash in my 100, and I don't let them give me $100 bills. Because it's very difficult for a person of color to pay for something with a 50 or 100 depending on where you go. I went to a Bob Evans in Canton, Michigan, Canton, Michigan, on my way home, and I ordered lunch, and a $50 bill is all I had on me. The guy in front of me pulled out a huge wad, paid for his, and you could tell he had bills of multiple denominations there. And I'm like, okay, well, this isn't going to be too bad. And so I handed the guy 50. He did this, he looked at me, he looked at the bill, he did one of these, took it to the back, and then brought it back and said, okay, I guess it's okay. And I'm just like, what? And that's happened to me before, but I thought I would give it a chance again, because I thought, well, maybe people have changed. But no, cashing a large bill or cashing a large check while black can still be an issue. So, and it's one of those things where how do you react to it? Do you raise a stink about it, or do you move on? And it's one of those things where I just thought, okay, he's being annoying, I'm just gonna move on because I got stuff to do. So I didn't fight it at that time, but there comes a point where there are certain racial actions that do need to be called out. So, all right. Here's one of my favorite too, and the Department of Justice got involved in this one. There was a black couple that put their home up for sale, and they got it appraised. And it came in lower than they thought. So they not decluttered, but they decolorized their house. And they called in a different appraiser. So they took down everything that it would indicate they're an African-American couple. They called in a different appraiser, and the appraisal came in $500,000 above the last appraisal. So when they filed that, the Department of Justice took notice, and they investigated. I don't know what the outcome was, but again, that shows you racism. Other things. Education, bias in academic and discipline. This is one too. A lot of, in our elementary schools particularly, sometimes African American children are disciplined differently than children who are not African American. They're given harsher punishments, they're sent to the office more often, they may be put in special education, simply because there may be more of a communications barrier, or just like a mistrust, than actual problem with behavior. And what it does, it kind of sets the child up for failure, and maybe they don't do as well going through because, they were 7 or 8 year old boy who, turned around in their seat and got yelled at, and, the white child did the same and nothing happened to them. So, and then the child begins to, internalize that self-doubt, what is wrong with me? And, maybe they don't do as well in school as they had figured. So these are just some examples of how racism plays out in real life, so to speak. Okay. So then, why the church? Why should we be the ones who are the leaders on fighting racism. And simply because, and this comes out of open wide our hearts, if we have received the love which restores meaning to our lives, how can we fail to share that to others? So if we have love, we have to give it to others. And if we're loving others, it's hard to be racist against them. Oh, by the way, does anybody know where this picture comes from? April knows where it comes from. April, you can't answer this question though. Does anyone else? This comes from what used to be St. Cecilia Parish, which is now St. Charles de Wanga Parish. This is their like dome ceiling above the altar. And it is of a black Jesus Christ with multicultural angels. And it also has other public relevant figures of that time that it was painted. Because I think it was painted, was it in the 60s?
67, so it was right about the time of the riot.
Okay.
The rebellion.
Yes, right after the rebellion. And so there are some priests who were pivotal at that point, who were also pictured in this particular mural. Okay.
You want me to, map?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so also that's in the Himadome, also in the clouds is an image of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King. The pastor of the church at that time was Father Raymond N. Ellis. So when he died in 70, whatever, early 70s, they put his image in that. And then in 2000, when the pastor, Father Thomas J. Finnegan, died, his image is also included.
Okay. It's quite impressive.
And the artist died this year.
Oh, no way. Okay. I'll have to put that on the slide then. All right. And again, we all need to take responsibility for correcting the injustices of racism and healing the harms it caused. And what this is April, you were there at this march, the NAACP march. This is a picture from the NAACP march.
This summer?
Yeah.
Okay, that was the Martin Luther King anniversary march.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it was. NAACP sponsored the 60th Freedom Walk. Remember the Freedom Walk on Washington, D.C., where like 250,000 or 1 million people was held in Washington, D.C. Well, they held a kind of like a practice march here in Detroit. And this was the 60th anniversary of that particular Freedom Walk. So this is actually it was pretty awesome to see that many people, diverse, from university, from unions, from businesses, or just people from the neighborhood who joined in to walk, to commit to justice. And that's exactly what they were doing, committing to wages, committing to better housing. They were committing to fighting racism all over again. So that was pretty good. It was a great event to be part of. And he was my hero, the guy carrying the cross, because that's exactly what it is, bearing that cross for others. Okay. And one of the greatest letters to church leaders as to why they should be at the forefront of racism is letter from the Birmingham jail. You could do a week-long seminar on this one alone, but in it, he challenged Christian leaders, pastors, to fight the status quo and follow the Lord. And then he talked about just law versus unjust law. But this is probably one of the strongest letters regarding the reasons that people of faith should be fighting racism. Now, he also points out the reasons why they don't. Again, status quo. People should be following the law, but is it a just law that they're following? And other excuses or just other ways that people don't take bold action in fighting racism. But he said the time has come for that to stop. And, I read the letter, and it's something that could have been written a month or 2 months ago. Because we've made some progress, we've taken a few steps back, and we still have a long way to go, but we can get there. So the two roads in the fight on racism, in all ways, in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Psalm 3:6. So I'm going to talk about the good road of the church, and I'm going to talk about the road of missed opportunities. So first, the good road. Here is, the Catholic Church has done many good things. Number one, to fight racism. They have founded schools and they have founded hospitals. For example, St. Catherine Drexel, Mother Mary Long, different people have founded schools, have founded healthcare places to help alleviate the suffering of African Americans and to help teach them, to help educate them, because education was definitely the way out. One of the first pastoral letters to come out of the USCCB, it wasn't widely published, but at least it was a start in the right direction. It was Discrimination and Christian Conscience, and this was a pastoral letter on segregation. It wasn't widely published, but it was around the time of Brown versus Education. And it talked about how, we need to rethink this whole segregation thing, and we need to consider integrating. So this was back in 1958, but again, it wasn't widely published. And it actually is a continuation of a letter a seminarian wrote back in the early 40s that he picked up again when he became a bishop in the 50s. So it's almost like a letter that was like 20 years in the making. So it was the first one. And then the Catholic Church, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of them, was a really strong ally in support on the march on Selma, on the bridge. You see the pictures of them with Martin Luther King arm in arm, with Sister Mary Ebo, with other priests, with other nuns who were just, marching and walking side by side with all the folks protesting the bus situation in Selma. And it worked. What it did too is that very, very rarely do all of these positive things happen in a vacuum. You may hear the word intersectionality. That would apply here. And what that means is you have the situation where you have Selma, then you have TV and media, and they merged. And all of those images of cops with dogs, all of those images of firefighters turning hose on people, and not just like a garden water hose, a firefighting hose. So it was powerful, and it was hitting people, and it was hurting people. You had children being pushed by grown men and cops. You had all these different images, and that sort of fueled the civil rights movement of the 60s, because now all of a sudden America's dirty laundry, so to speak, was being broadcast all over the world, and we could no longer hide from it. Between all of these hateful people, between, black people protesting for themselves, between, the white allies who joined us who saw the injustices, and then between TV, it became a powerful force for change. All right. Now, the first official document that was really widely promulgated by the USCCB for racism was Brothers and Sisters to Us. That was written in 1979. And the interesting thing about all of these pastoral letters, you will notice, they tend to follow a pivotal event in history. So, 1958 segregation followed Brown versus Education, and the whole issue of segregation and the importance of integration. And Brothers and Sisters to Us came on the heels of the whole economic downturn of the 70s. Remember the long gas lines, high unemployment? Didn't some of you guys have like 18% mortgage rates? 16% mortgage rates, okay. And as a result, they usually write a letter that as a response to that. And in 1979 was the Brothers and Sisters to Us, and it talked about how the economic downturn affects people of color more significantly than it affects others, and how we need to change and recognize and help our brothers and sisters in that area. And then something that kind of helped the Black Catholic movement. In 1980, the Institute of Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University was founded. And this was people like Cyprian Davis, who wrote the book, history of Black Catholics, which if you want to know more about the Black Catholic in America, history of Black Catholics is probably a foundational book. But you have people like Cyprian Davis, Father Rivers. You have people like Sister Thea Bowman, who came together and say being Black and Catholic is a thing. Because for so long, Black people who were Catholic felt that they could be Catholic on Sunday in church, but then they had to leave their Black self on the doorstep and then walk into church, be Catholic, come back out, and then pick their Black self off the doorstep and walk out. And Institute for Black Catholic Studies showed us that you can do both equally with dignity, correctly, scripturally, according to church documents, in being the person that God created you in. So it's still going strong today. I was lucky enough to spend 2 weeks there this past summer. So it was pretty interesting. And what they do is they archive a lot of things, they write a lot of things, they run teaching and preaching classes, liturgy classes, different community meals, and they're sort of kind of like the guard keepers for, what is Black and catechetical throughout the year. So they're a pretty powerful force as well. And that helps with racism because it kind of helps alleviate that self-doubt part of racism, because racism is not only an action out, it's a feeling within as well. And this helps to restore Black Catholics sort of to full spiritual health, so they can keep worshiping and serving the Lord. Okay, what we have seen and heard, this one was pretty cool. What we have seen and heard was written by 8 or 10 Black bishops back in 1984. Bishop Wilton Gregory was one of them, he's now Cardinal. Bishop Moses Anderson was another one of them. He was Detroit's first and only Black bishop. He has since passed away. And there were a couple other notables there. But this defined or summarized Black Catholic spirituality. And it talked about Black gifts, and it sort of helped the Black Catholic community realize their role in growing their own community and in farming and developing their own indigenous leadership. Meaning that, trying to increase Black vocations, telling Black people they aren't good enough to preach the gospel and to share it with others. So this is another foundational document because it tells Black people you have a responsibility to take care of yourself and to share your gifts with the entire universal church. And you belong at the table. If they're not going to give you a seat at the table, bring one. So this is basically what we have seen and heard says. And you can find a lot of these online. And then we got a big shot in the arm when St. John Paul II came to New Orleans back in 1987. And he gave a one-page speech to the Black Catholic leaders of New Orleans at that time. And New Orleans was the perfect place to do that because it really is kind of the hub of Black Catholic spirituality in America. Their city, I think their city's 40% of their Catholics in New Orleans, 40% are Black, so it's huge. And they do have a certain swagger about them. Because I spent 2 weeks there, so I do know. And but he basically said, we need your Black gifts here. We need you to share your Black gifts with the church because it is your Black gifts shared with the church that help set that example for the Catholic Church being universal. You don't have to travel to Europe, you don't have to travel to Africa, you don't have to travel to, South America or other places to see the universality of the church. You can demonstrate that, right here in America. So it was a huge shot in the arm, and I am so glad that I had a chance to read that. Now, Archbishop Vic Morant is an introvert. He doesn't do a lot, but he did a couple things that I thought were pretty good. Back in 2015, he did a massive pardon, just asking the community for forgiveness for the sins of Detroit's, past church in preparation for Synod 2016. So I thought that was pretty good. And then back in 2020, he did write a pastoral letter to the Black community, just, grieving with them regarding the whole George Floyd situation, which kind of like threw the entire country upside down because, and I think it threw us upside down because we thought we were over kind of like post-racial, but then we saw that we weren't. And then not only that, but it's that whole intersectionality. So, back in 1960, it was TV. Support Ed Selma. It was TV, that kind of brought America's past to the world. This time it was a cell phone that brought America's current to the world. Someone videotaped what was going on with the knee on the neck for the entire 9 minutes that it was there. And it changed things because it kind of like let our, kind of let our I don't want to say dirty laundry, but, kind of let out of the bag that we still had a long way to go. So that was good. All right, and then Open Wide Our Hearts came out in 2018, and it came out in response to Charlottesville. Remember the folks who were having scripture study, and then the young man came in, whenever you're having scripture study, Black church, we tend to be very welcome, open arms, quite hospitable, pull up a chair, we'll talk to you, we'll pray with you, no big deal. So, he walked into this church, and then just after talking to them for a certain amount of time, he just killed them and just shot them. And on top of it, he was caught, of course, and then they took him to, to get a cheeseburger afterwards. If that were a different situation, would have gotten such hospitable treatment by the police. So that was sort of, that had to be addressed. And then, of course, the Freddie Gray situation where Freddie Gray was killed at the hands of police again. So Open Wide Our Hearts not only talks about the different racism, but it also addresses relationship between people and police. But it is a pretty good pastoral letter. And then Pope Francis came in and said something that I love. Diversity is a richness not to be feared. Yes. He said that back in a couple of years ago, back in 2021, because the goal should be diversity and unity, not uniformity. It's not necessary for us to all walk alike, talk alike, act alike, do things alike. Diversity is important, and it actually shows the beauty and the bigness of God, of what God can create. God created all these diverse cultures, diverse people, and we can coexist, side by side, and we can coexist with each other and enjoy each other's culture without, stamping on one. So, all right. Okay, co-workers in the field. She is one of my favorite female theologians, but it's Dr. Vanessa White. She has actually spoken at our Black Catholic Women's Conference before. But she feels that, or she has used Fratelli Tutti, which is another Pope Francis document, as a door for further dialogue on racism and its deadly impacts. And she feels that Catholic social teaching, which I completely agree, could be the basis of conversation about a critical race or a critical issue dividing America, but race was not mentioned in the article. So we do have Catholic tools and Catholic teaching that we can use going forward to really talk about, how we can love one another and how we can see one another as people. And I think Catholic social teaching is one of those things that we don't promote enough. So what are some of the missed opportunities? In the same document, Brothers and Sisters to Us, that was written back in 1979, it says the Catholic Church cannot remain silent about racial injustices in society and in its own structure. So it admit that in its own pastoral letter that, maybe we should change a little bit. Maybe we should do something. Maybe we should do something different. They're still a little bit silent about it, but at least the admission is there. So that's step one towards healing. Other missed opportunities. Augustus told him he had to go overseas to be educated and ordained as a priest before coming back to America to be America's first recognized black priest. Now, a lot of people think Father Augustus Tolton was America's first black priest. He was not. Does everybody know that?
No.
Okay. Father Augustus Tolton was the fourth black priest in America. The other three were James Healy, Andrew Healy, and I forgot the last Healy brother. There were the three Healy brothers. And one of the Healy brothers was the first black bishop as well. And another Healy brother was the first black president of Georgetown University. However, they were very fair-skinned. They were the son of a mixed-race mother and a white Irish father, and they were fairly well off. So I don't know if his mother and his father were ever, their mother and father were ever married, or if they were allowed to be married at that point. But I have to do a little more research on that. But yeah, the Healys were the first three black priests in America. But they were very, very fair. If you ever look them up online, they're very fair-skinned. You would not know that they were black. They could quote-unquote pass, which is a term we used to use a lot of. But yeah, a lot of people don't realize that Augustus Tolton was not the first one. But he was the first recognized one who openly admitted, and he was dark-skinned and dark features, so it's not something he could hide from. But he was the first recognizable black priest of America. Let's see. And the Georgetown University, of course, had its issue with slavery, where it sold slaves to basically keep the doors of the university open. So they're still wrangling with that past because they were slave owners for a long time. They did divest from slavery, but now it's like, they've got this huge, they've got these huge riches. What do they do with them? What type of reparations should they be? Should they be reparations to the family members, to the descendants of those who were enslaved? Or should it be put into some sort of foundation to kind of help with all anti-racist activities? So, but I have to admit, I will give the Jesuits props on this one. They've taken this issue and they have owned it. They're not running away from it. And they've put together committees and they've put together, multi-year strategy, multi-year plans to make sure that some sort of reparation is done for the descendants of those who were enslaved under their watch. And then vocations. For a long time, black men and black women were discouraged from entering vocations or entering the priesthood or entering the religious life throughout history. So that has contributed to the small number of African Americans in religious life now, and then it's kind of at a fever pitch right now. So we're doing what we can to encourage vocations in the church. Racism as a pro-life issue, this is one that is touchy because, abortion is wrong, and, we know that. But we want to make sure that the same energy is given to all pro-life issues, from conception through death. We want to make sure that capital punishment is addressed, education is addressed. Once the child is here, or even before the child is here, how about making sure the child is born? Because black mothers have 2.6 times the infant mortality and morbidity rate as white mothers. So even if they decide to keep their baby, there's a lot less chance they'll actually have the baby going forward or won't have, major medical complications in the process. What about things like daycare, living wage, other things that, promote life throughout. And then, of course, how are we treating our elderly? Are we giving them, the proper amount of medical care? Are they getting pain relief? What are some of those pro-life issues that are very important going forward? And then Black Lives Matter. I included this one simply because we're at odds with Black Lives Matter, of course. Black Lives Matter is important. The problem is the 501c3 has kind of taken a left turn with this particular this particular organization, and they're promoting things that don't necessarily align with Catholic teachings. So my thing is, rather than disassociate with the Black Lives Matter organization, partner with them, kind of filter out what's not good and keep what is good, or repurpose it for, the importance of Black Lives Matter. So I'm hoping that they do that soon, but I just don't want them to just completely walk away from it and ignore it. Because I think it's very important that our lives matter as well. And then diversity of art, images, and worship spaces, and materials. And, Mary's done a great job of having diverse saints, diverse images, all over your parish hall. Some parishes you walk into and it's all, European saints or, very monoculture type of images, and it's like, our church is just much bigger than that, It's much more diverse in that we have saints from, everywhere. We'll kind of show them, because I think that it will begin to disarm people, and I think it will begin to show them that, the Catholic Church is just bigger than me and my neighborhood. It really includes all of these people, and maybe I should get to know more about them, get to learn more about them. And then, two, advocating for schools, voting rights, housing, and education. The church has done some of this, but of course they could do more. Okay, but I think the biggest missed opportunity of all is kind of the silence. Is that the churches, you don't hear a lot about racism from the pulpit. You don't hear a lot about racism even in parish bulletins, or unless it's an intentional, concerted effort put together by a group of people. A typical parishioner, even a Black parishioner, could go by 1 or 2 years and not hear anything about, racism. And racism is a sin, and racism is a pro-life issue. So it should be included, even in parishes that are not as diverse as others. Our community is browning more and more. So you want to kind of be at the forefront and ready and educated to receive people who are different than you. Yes, Mary?
Can you go back a slide for a second? Because this is me, because I wasn't here to make a comment.
Okay, no problem.
And thank you for the plug. But I also want to, without going back all her slides, to talk about the interpersonal, one-on-one, step up, don't look to the next layer up to do it for you kind of situation. Because while we worked, and we're very careful when we put the icons up down the hallway and what goes in these rooms, but I'll tell you, trying to find textbooks in the last 20 years that we give to our children, they were more diverse in 2000 than they are in 2023. So when we work on content for the faith formation stuff, that's one piece. But to look diversity, and not just Rachel, I want kids in wheelchairs, and I want, equal of gender. To try and find that's not so easy. We work on it. My challenge is, for all the different groups y'all belong to, have you paid attention to materials that your groups are using? And I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus here, so I'm not. But if you're in the Knights of Columbus, have you paid attention to what your materials look like that you're sharing at meetings, or that you want parishes to use, or any other social group you belong to, things you bring to us that you want distributed in the parish, or that you're given to your grandchildren, your children, that's good, then I promise you, we're working.
Okay.
But if y'all would just take that to heart as well, what's in your own homes? What do your grandchildren see as we're looking at nativity sets and Christmas cards you're sending out and all that. I'm not looking for a miracle, but I'm just asking for everybody to, that's where I think we miss the opportunity in our own lives, is to pay attention to what we're consuming and what we're giving out, and don't just look for the church, the bigger church, to fix it.
Because we are the church.
Because we are the church. Y'all, that's all of us.
Right.
So I'm jumping in there because I didn't want to lose that thought, but I really think it's got to be combined together.
Yeah, I do too. And And the whole interpersonal part of it, it really is very, very important because people with formed hearts and people with good hearts go on to build good systems in good societies. People with damaged hearts and misguided hearts go on to build bad systems. So it really does start with the personal. One of the I was talking with Attorney Peter, and I forgot Attorney Peter's last name. He works at Wayne State University, who's a specialist on structural racism in Southeast Michigan. And he said one of the problems, or one of the feedback of constructive criticisms about the 1960s is that they focused so much on structural and societal racism that they didn't do enough with the personal. And when the structures and the society was updated and the people still had the hard hearts, we went right back to bad systems again because the personal didn't change. So that's definitely something that, you know, we as church people can do. And we can. All right. Okay, so what can I do? Bishop Braxton has a chapter in his book called Pray, Listen, Learn, Think, and Act. But one thing that I believe everyone should do is examine your conscience. And actually, this is a combination of what he put and a combination of what I said. So I will distinguish between the two going through so that when you pick up the book, hey, that wasn't in the book. No, some of this isn't in the book. A couple of it is, a couple of them are, but some of them aren't. Because I think it's very important for us to examine our conscience, you know, confess our sins, and recognize our own biases. I think that's one of the most important first steps in mitigating racism is where have I been complicit or where have I complied in the past? And where can I do better in the future? So that's one of the first things you can do. You know, do some reconciliation, maybe do some reading or something of that sort. But just kind of like, you know, work on your heart. You know, pretend like you're having a Lenten season in your heart for racism, so you can kind of, you know, clear that out. Because we, people of color have all had those self-doubt sessions, or, you know, maybe we don't like those people over there or those people over there. You know, I had a really interesting racism situation growing up. My mother's Black Baptist, and my father was Puerto Rican Catholic. So that's where the Figueroa name comes from, and that's where the, you know, Catholic part of me coming from. I was in a Girl Scout troop, and it was an African American troop, and there were girls who could not sit next to me because my dad was Puerto Rican. And that is, I know, I'm just as black as they are. Yeah, they couldn't sit next to me because my dad was Puerto Rican. And so that's how much racism reaches down into that. So that's why, you know, we all grew up with these biases and things that we need to tend to. And here's an interesting study, and this is pretty new within the past few years. At first, we thought that racial bias or racial notices in kids started about age 2 or 3. But what the American Academy of Pediatrics found out, and I put the link there in case you wanted to look it up, is that kids begin to notice racial differences, visible, you know, pronounced racial differences, around, they think, age 6 months. Yes, all right. So between ages 2 and 4 is when they begin to form attitudes about those racial differences based on their home environment, is what they think. And by age 12, it's set. So it's very important to talk to kids about racism beginning at an early age. And there are lots of places online you can do this. The Smithsonian has something called Talking to Your Children About Race. That's really good. The Kellogg Foundation has Why Race Matters. So there's some really good racial information online, you know, that you can talk to kids about race at their level, but you want to do it early because according to this Academy of Pediatrics, and of course the study needs to be repeated and needs to be verified and things, but this was pretty good data that usually by age 12, racial attitudes have been set. And they've been set for people who have advantage, and they've been set for people who have self-doubt. All right, attend Mass weekday to bridge the divide or to have some sort of, to bridge the racial divide is what I should say. Just to make overcoming racism part of your prayer discipline for that particular day. Read the gospel, especially the Pauline letters, scriptural, because those give you a lot of information on how to act and how to show love towards another person. And then, read the documents, contact a diverse parish that's different than yours, and arrange a coffee or arrange a visit. Church of the Transfiguration in Southfield did this, where they took a carload or busload down to Sacred Heart Parish and kind of had an exchange of that sort. So that's something that, we as people of faith can do, because it's interesting when you go into a different environment, how much you begin to appreciate your faith, and you see people who are, have the same mass parts as you, but they're worshiping in a way that's a little different, but still Catholic. So, work with young people and set a good example, be good role models for young people as far as racial tolerance is concerned. And be honest with young people too. A lot of this is new territory for us, and America struggles with this racial current and its racial past. And some of it's not comfortable for us. But, we still have to do it, so sometimes baby steps helps out a lot. But definitely be good role models for your young people. Stay away from, blanket comments like, oh, all those people are just here to take our jobs, or, other things like that kids pick up on, and they begin to, internalize them and then act on them. So, speak up when comments are made and make sure that you work for justice. Become involved in ministries to strengthen families of color, or, families of all colors, really, because, poverty is real, no matter what color you are. Again, hold conversations, invite a person from a different culture, a different race, to have coffee or to sit down and listen to each other's stories. One exercise that I've done, and since we have 2 hours, we may have time to do it here. So if you have blank paper and pens, I'll tell you. Go grab them. But so I'll tell you. As soon as she comes back with it, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Read books and have guest lectures. Dr. Peter from the university, from Wayne State University. I keep wanting to say that U of D Jesuit Law School, but I think he's still at Wayne State University. Is a great one to speak on structural racism. Father John McKenzie is
What kind of racism? I don't hear that first word.
structural
Okay.
and systemic. Yeah, he has written papers, and he leads up a commission on structural and societal racism in Southeast Michigan. Or he did at one point. His talk is actually on the Archdiocese of Detroit. Remember when we used to do those strong vital faith, strong connections, strong faith, vital connections? It should be in one of those videos. But he did a great job on talking about, structural and societal racism in Southeast Michigan. He might be a great one to kind of bring in. And then hold a town hall or forum on, racism or cultural diversity. And then, of course, being forgiving of mistakes or misses. We're all going to make them in this whole racial diversity, racial equity talk. The point is just kind of set ground rules early and say, I might say something wrong. Will you please forgive me? Some people are so wounded by racism that, you try to extend an olive branch, and it is just met with suspicion and distrust, and then they snap back. But you still have to be a little bit bold and try to step out anyway. And if it's not the right opportunity at that point, continue to pray and maybe, go on to the next person, so to speak. Ask for help and be intentional. Just say, from now on, I'm going to do this to be a more or less, race-conscious person or more anti-racial person. And give yourself time and kind of build that muscle memory, so to speak. Because we've spent hundreds of years in America being a racist society. It's not going to go away with one program. It's going to take our lifetime and lifetimes after us before we're really, I don't think we'll ever be color-free because it's programmed into us to, you know, look differently at someone who's different than us. But at least we don't have to let the hate get to us and affect us the way we have now. So, and always too, as your parishes become more black and brown, as you know, as more Hispanics begin to move into the neighborhood and other races and cultural diversity begins to move into the neighborhood, and you notice them starting to come to your parishes, start planning with but not for them. Because I know sometimes it's our temptation, just go ahead and plan everything for everybody. But you know, invite them to the table and realize you may have a little bit longer of a planning process if you invite new and diverse people to the table. But that's all part of it. That should be part of the plan and part of the learning situation. Another way, and I don't know if I put, oh yeah, I did. I put down, educate yourself by, reading books, holding book clubs. These are easy entry-level ways to become a more anti-racist person. Thank you.